So the idea of getting good data and maintaining it is like, it's a very full business. In the US, like in the US markets, it's like a $7-8 billion a year business. So it's, it's major, it's worth doing on its own. It's not something you should do in addition to like hosting an exchange. And so when we looked at this, we said, how are we going to get that data on chain? And that's where we started analyzing the various solutions that had been made available. Some people just completely in-housed the Oracle function. There were other sort of like slower oracles that were out there. The whole thing just felt like it was built on not strong of a foundation to really scale. And that's where we started to dig in and figured, what would be the architecture? What's our dream scenario for this to exist in order for DeFi to grow? And that's what kicked off, kind of the whole snowball of the network.
Welcome to the Edge Podcast. I'm DeFi Dad here with Nomadic from 4RC. Today's show spotlights Pyth Network, a DeFi primitive that acts as the price layer of global financial markets. In this episode, we talk with Douro Labs co-founder Mike Cahill about the vision and accelerated growth of Pyth Network as next-gen Oracle infrastructure, including their latest release of Pyth Lazer 1 millisecond price speeds, and where they are focused building next in 2025 to support a world where DeFi is rapidly gaining ground on the world of legacy finance. But before we do, just a quick word from our sponsors who make the Edge podcast possible. Overwhelmed trying to manage your crypto and DeFi investments? Meet iYield, a free financial planning tool for crypto natives and yield farmers. iYield's dashboard compares returns from your DeFi positions side by side, providing clarity to help you make better decisions. iYield supports a growing list of over 16,000 tokens and 40 of the top DeFi and staking protocols across 17 blockchains, including Ethereum L2s. The best part is that iYield is 100% free, anonymous, and there are no ads. Check out iYield.com today to take control of your financial future. Launching your blockchain in months? That's so 2020. Launch your network in minutes with Tansi infrastructure. Restaked security through Symbiotic, plus full customization just a few clicks away. It's 2025. Build smarter, scale faster. Visit Tansi.network to get started. Meet Definitive, the most advanced on-chain trading platform across every chain. Built by Coinbase alumni, Definitive's institutional-grade features lets anyone trade like a pro, featuring advanced order types like limit, twop, and stop loss, gasless trading, one-time approvals, and soon cross-chain swaps for multi-chain EVM and Solana. Definitive routes your orders through every liquidity pool to get you the best price on every trade. The alpha is on-chain. Trade it instantly on Definitive. For Edge Podcast listeners, enjoy zero trading fees on your first $50,000 in volume at defidad.definitive.fi.
Bitcoin Layer 2s are everywhere, but Goat Network is different. We're the first to use decentralized sequencers, letting both Bitcoin and Dogecoin secure our network while earning native yield. No nonsense, just your assets working smarter. Our early supporters got it, with over 8 million committed in December alone and already earning returns. Next up, mainnet launch in Q1 of 2025. Goat Network, where Bitcoin scaling meets real yield. Visit goat.network, get involved, and start earning sustainable yield.
All right, let's introduce Mike Cahill, the co-founder and CEO of Douro Labs. Mike, welcome to the Edge Podcast. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me here.
If you've ever wondered, how do we as DeFi users rely on price information on chain? One of the answers is Pyth. So we're going to talk about Pyth today as one of the major pieces of blockchain infrastructure. It is what makes the world go round if you're a DeFi user. And we want to talk about everything from, there was a recent announcement with Pyth Lazer, these 1 millisecond price feeds, which sounds wild if you go back to like the early days of DeFi and think about really like how slow those oracles or price feeds were in comparison. But we also want to talk about some of the bets you all have made. Like from a BD standpoint, I always associate Pyth with Solana, and that early bet has really paid off from my standpoint. And I'd love to just kind of get more of your perspective on that. And then, of course, like where you guys are building in terms of like the next frontier for Pyth. So Anyways, Mike, maybe you can share a little bit more about, the founding of Douro Labs or Pyth. Would also love to just learn a little bit more about, who you are as a person.
Yeah, thanks. I'm excited to be here. I have a banking background, and I worked in first operations and then sales and trading in the FX market, and then in high frequency trading. And it was in working at Jump in their crypto business where the idea of Pyth came about. It was 2020. Actually, it was late 2019. And I'm sure you guys will remember like those waves where it was the big one. And, it felt like it was the big one then, even though it was pre launching of Compound. Actually, no, sorry, this was post Compound. So now Compound had launched and everything is starting to make sense. Solana had just come out. And we were trying to lay out the entire market map of like what's needed and, like a lot of VCs do, right? Like where are all the critical pieces? What will work? What won't work? And we really fell on the fact that we thought that we had a pretty good idea that this idea of like perpetual markets and derivatives would be the way to create like a unified global trading system. And the reason for that is because there's this setup where any of the large traders in big asset classes, so like Jump is the largest for futures, but Jane Street's the largest for ETFs. They end up having to deal with so many regulations in order to be able to maintain their license. And so if you think about like, if you zoom back for a second and you think about like finance as having these three layers, like there's a price layer, there's execution, and then there's settlement. That exists in all the markets globally. But the problem is it's fully siloed. So you could take any example. You could take the U.S. equity market, and I can give you those three components, right? There's the SIP feed that's put together by the Consolidated Tape Association. There's the execution that happens on NASDAQ or NYSE, and then there's settlement. It happens on DTCC. But you could go take that and say European equities, and there's those same three things. The problem with them is that they're fully isolated from one another due to the regulations. And the analogy I always think of is it looks like the taxi industry when Uber first came out, right? And so we thought that this would be ripe for disruption, but you needed to first have the data. Because no trader is going to go out there and like no major trader is going to go out there and trade equities everywhere just because they were fully handcuffed by the current regulations. And so when we looked at this, we said, how are we going to get that data on chain? And that's where we started analyzing the various solutions that had been made available. Some people just completely in-housed the Oracle function. There were other sort of like slower oracles that were out there. The whole thing just felt like it was built on not strong of a foundation to really scale. And that's where we started to dig in and figured, what would be the architecture? What's our dream scenario for this to exist in order for DeFi to grow? And that's what kicked off, kind of the whole snowball of the network.
I'm curious, back then when you were just getting started thinking about like what product to build, how did you view the landscape of opportunity? Like where were strengths and weaknesses? I think you called out like sometimes oracles were just done in-house. I want to say Synthetics did that like early on. Like they had some, single centralized oracle for certain markets that were trading. But then like there was this grander vision that, we all believed like, well, this has got to be some mega protocol type thing at some point. This has got to be decentralized. Like that's always been the drum that everyone beats.
Yeah, Synthetics did have that. And I think the problem that they had with it led to the reason for so many people to want to have this outsourced. So the idea of getting good data and maintaining it is like, it's a very full business. In the US, like in the US markets, it's like a $7-8 billion a year business. So it's, it's major, it's worth doing on its own. It's not something you should do in addition to like hosting an exchange. And Synthetics had this issue where they relied on, I believe it was like an Australian CFD or FX broker for a market in like Korea won. And the market just got completely out of whack and somebody took advantage of all the liquidity and they had to have a bounty, and they had to go settle with this person. And then they moved on from that, and they said, all right, we need another solution. And they started working with Chainlink. So here are the issues. There's a couple of them. The first one is the update time. So as I mentioned, I worked in high frequency trading. Jump trades at kind of milliseconds, if not nanoseconds, in the futures markets. And the speeds of, obviously, Ethereum's 12-second blocks, even on Solana, we're talking about 400 milliseconds. But you had this paradigm where the Oracle updates were coming usually like once a day. They weren't happening very frequently. It was set on like an egg timer where it said, hey, every day, give me an update price, or if you move 50 basis points, let me know. And it was sort of, I joke about it, but it really kind of had to be designed that way because the gas was so expensive. But that model is just not going to work, right? It's like assuming that the Uniswap AMM feed is going to replace the New York Stock Exchange. It's not set up for it. It's great for bootstrapping, for getting us all comfortable with dealing with DeFi for the very first time, but there's no way that that's going to be kind of end state for hundreds of millions or billions of people coming on to DeFi. And so, as I mentioned, speed was number one. Number two was around accessibility of the symbols. So the prevailing logic, and Chainlink was the largest oracle doing all of this during kind of the DeFi 1.0, is that, or at least at the time was, we're going to go get nodes and we're going to incentivize them to go read from the internet and publish data to blockchains. And like the critical assumption here is that the data is available on the internet, and really all you need to do is incentivize these people to go and publish it. Now that's an okay assumption when you deal with crypto markets, because it's an immature or relatively nascent market, and the market data fees have not yet settled in. But when you look at something that's much more advanced and mature, like U.S. equities, for instance, I mentioned, these are markets where you've got multiple billions of dollars that are being paid towards market data fees. It's highly controlled. It's one of the reasons why Google, manages all the world's data, albeit like the financial markets. That all runs through Bloomberg. And the reason for it is just because it's so tightly controlled. And it's not open source. It's not freely available. It's just highly controlled. And so that was the second thing we needed to solve for. It's like, okay, we got to solve for speed, but we also have to solve for accessibility to be able to provide non-crypto data. And particularly U.S. equities data was like the litmus test. If we can get U.S. equities data on chain without having to go to NASDAQ or NYSE, we will have figured out something that people have been trying to figure out for dozens of years since they started putting in these market data fees. And that was really what led to the architecture. The architecture of Pyth is get people who own data and have them opt into the network and then publish their data directly. Now, what's cool about that is it's an incredibly streamlined workflow, so that you have cut out all the middlemen. Because typically what happens, even with Bloomberg, so Bloomberg people think of as being the data source, but they're actually a conduit, they're a marketplace. And all the data that you get from Bloomberg has been purchased from someone. So it could be that you're buying it from NASDAQ or NYSE. This is creating, for the first time, an alternative source. And so we basically look at NASDAQ and think, from first principles, well, what is it that you're buying, right? You're buying the bids and offers of the orders that are in the exchange, or the prices with which they just printed. Now, where are they getting the prices from? Well, they're getting from big trading firms. And it's such the case that most of the highly liquid trades have been consolidated to about one big winner. I mentioned Jane Street as ETFs, Jump as futures, but this is actually the case for most of the asset classes. Susquehanna does all the the bulk majority of the options trading. Virtue and Citadel do the bulk majority of the equities trading. So you can go to these handful of participants, and you can get a disproportionately high percentage of the volume on the exchanges. Now, there's one other feature of this. All of those trading firms hate paying their market data fees. And so as soon as you go and approach them and say, I have this idea, it's going to allow you to get exposure to potentially the next generation of finance on DeFi. And it's also going to put some pressure on the market data fees that you're paying. It's the light bulb moment for them, and allowed us to incredibly quickly scale the network from idea generation to having dozens and then many more of the largest like institutional trading participants, not limited to just trading firms, but also like smaller exchanges. And then as you can imagine, once you start working your way up the ladder, you end up being able to get bigger and bigger exchanges. And one of the hallmarks that I think underscores this a bit is the fact that Pyth has data from Cboe, which is one of the largest U.S. equity exchanges under their BATS umbrella. They also do this for futures. They own the VIX, so they publish their data, and they're thinking, and this is right, is, well, if this is going to be the next frontier, I don't want to be the last mover. Like, let's get in here early and like let's be a part of it, as opposed to trying to be the Luddite to make sure it never happens.
Just kind of like on this historical arc of Pyth, in hindsight, kind of making a bet on Solana so early is obvious, I think, to everyone, but I don't think it was nearly as obvious at that time when you did it. So just kind of want to linger on this a little bit more. Like, what went into that decision making? Like, what was the thinking at the time? And then maybe if you can just kind of take us through a mini timeline of like when it looked good, when it looked bad, and kind of where we're at now.
Yeah, it's funny because in hindsight, it unravels the way that is sort of logical, because people will have made the same decision that we made. And I'll explain what I mean by that. The intention for Pyth was always to be, number one, a blockchain-based oracle. So there's two ways to go about this. You can do this either on-chain or off-chain. And we chose to do this on-chain. And part of that was when you're going to big trading firms and you're asking them to trust somebody with their data, they're going to be very, very sensitive to the fact that there are other trading firms that are in there. And so it was really important for us to be able to represent this is just being done on a blockchain. So like design decision number one is like, which blockchain do we want to use? And number two is we wanted to be on all the blockchains, because we didn't really care about which one was the winner. We actually were just betting on DeFi. And so now you can say, well, we need to be fast and we need to be on the blockchain. And so in order to be at the fastest speed, you just have to be on the blockchain that's fastest. It was incredibly simple. It wasn't any more comprehensive than that. So we were left with one option. It was only Solana. It was the fastest blockchain at the time. And then that meant that we could be updating to like Avalanche at their fastest blocks, because Solana blocks were about 2x the speed. And now when you think about it, we're not the only application that's going to go through that decision criteria. And so actually it gives you a direct correlation to the success that Solana had and what their superpower was. Now, ultimately, blockchains in the past had been really optimizing for trust. And there was that's the core innovation for sure. And I like to think about that as almost being misguided. Right? So people anticipated at the time, just like with other technology, I'll give one example as an analogy, but people anticipated that trust was going to be most paramount, and people were going to be willing to sacrifice this, like the ability to send lots of transactions. You have 50 transactions per second on Solana at 12-second blocks. And so you kind of play this like Atari level of, 2D, really compromised design space to get things done, right? Like simplistic AMMs, incredibly high gas fees during congestion periods. But, all done under the banner of, this is super secure and safe. But the reality is that people like that, and it's, certainly better, but they need the performance to really match the off-chain. And the faster we get and the cheaper we get, the more people that come in. And so you can see this, if you plot a curve over what I would call DeFi 1.0 and then DeFi 2.0 and the number of users that you have over time, it really just kind of shows this direct correlation, because there's only so many people who are willing to deal with these trade-offs in favor of security and like decentralization. And we already have them. They're all on. We've got 100% of them. The people that cared about Ethereum at the most secure, that are willing to do trade-offs where it takes you several seconds, they're in. Then you get to Solana speeds, and it's like, okay, the people that you're able to onboard at that point, we've got a lot of them in. And each generation brings more and more people, and we have more features. And of course, there are going to be new features that draw people in, like meme coins and other things that are certainly capable. But as that becomes abstracted away, and abstracted away, I mean just it's imperceptibly different than the centralized experience, the Robinhoods. That's where you really start to see this trade-off. We always believed that would be the case, and that blockchains would just continue to get faster and cheaper. Like gas is not going to be something that people are really willing to pay, and it needs to be abstracted away. The analogy I would give you on this is, like at the dawn of the internet, the big feature was you got continuous connectivity to whatever you're communicating with. So like you can get like updated articles all the time, or the inventory of the store can update. But when you first had the internet and it was super slow, like we're talking about loading, 10 images over a minute and a half. Now, if you can get 10 images on like a page turn of a catalog, there's no way you're going to win. Like the amount of people who geek out about that is very small. But by the time like 10 years later, when you have broadband internet and it's loading in a half a second, that's when grandma gets it. And she's like, oh, I understand this feature. You actually have to be as good as, if not better than the previous technology's parity in all of those features that most people care about, and still get this for free. And that's why I'm so focused on, for Pyth, it's like we just need to make things as cheap and as fast as possible, because what we're going to win on is not necessarily just porting people over. We're going to win on the entire growth of the industry and just including more people, just like we've always done with all technology, right? Everything becomes cheaper, but the pie gets so much bigger, and therefore the revenue gets split amongst different participants as opposed to sort of the old incumbents that refuse to update.
This episode is brought to you by Mantle, the ultimate Ethereum L2 for builders. With over $2.16 billion in TVL, Mantle powers multi-billion-dollar yield-bearing assets like CMETH and FBTC, driving sustainable growth and capital efficiency. Plus, Mantle offers a unique reward station for airdropping different tokens to MNT holders, including one ongoing campaign for 4 million Athena tokens and another for 570,000 Eigen. To learn more, go to mantle.xyz, and thanks to Mantle for supporting us at the Edge Podcast and Edge Newsletter. So, Mike, where do you think we are now in DeFi if we relate it to like that analogy with like, the early internet? Because I've got a really simple example. If you go back to the last bull cycle, let's say 2020, 2021, there wasn't much to do in terms of like trading perps. Like that was still really an early thing. Most volume was trading on centralized exchanges. And now like the numbers that perps do on chain, which I think is clearly like playing out in favor of like your guys' early vision to believe that, there would be that much more economic activity moving on chain, and that it would, get closer and closer to parity with what you're used to in traditional finance. It's just that much more competitive, and it still feels early. So like, I'm wondering, how does this play into, how Pyth is building alongside these builders, knowing that we're growing a lot. There's that much more economic activity, but there's still not like the high frequency type trading that you would see in TradFi on chain.
There's the typical Gartner like hype cycle, and there's also that quote like people overestimate the effects of technology in the short term and underestimate them in the long term. I think we've gone through in 2020 that high expectations that everything's going to move on chain, and this is the super cycle. It's the the last onboarding opportunity, that sort of thing. And we've been building in the slow grind for a long time. And I think we're making a lot more progress than those of us who are in the industry tend to notice, right? There's that boiling frog analogy where, you're not really feeling it because it's just so close, and you're sort of immune to a lot of the excitement that people have. So in order to keep myself in check, I use the DEX versus SEX like market share as like the kind of the guiding light. And so you can do that for both spot and for derivatives. So for spot, it's been crazy lately just because that's where all the meme coins launch. But this month it's 20%. And now that is a number that sounds crazy. It sounds crazy high to those of us that have been in like 2019 or 2020. because like these are days where you would look at a centralized exchange and it's just, it was unfathomable to think that there'd be that much going on DeFi. For derivatives, we're starting to see a lot as well, and that's at 10%. So it's had a steeper curve because 10% is like what we're looking at right now for this month. I think the high prior to that was around 9%, and that was in like the summer, but it's been around about 6%. And then last year, or the year before rather, so 2023, it was around 3% was the high. So we went from 3 to about 6, now 9, and then 10, all in the period of a year. And it's very sticky. And we keep getting the better UX that looks and feels a little bit more like parity to centralized. And that comes out through innovations everywhere. Obviously, it's the reason why we built Lazer is because it needs to be hyper fast. But it's also the reason why Hyperliquid, for instance, has gobbled up as much market share as they have so far. And why it's now setting the current standard for what people are approaching. So if you're building on any of these chains, or if you're supporting one of these chains, you're now looking to try and reduce your block times or increase speeds as much as you possibly can, because that's now the table stakes.
So let's say that I'm a DeFi builder, Mike. I think one thing I've been confused about is I just have no idea where to start in terms of like, how would I be making the decision to integrate with Pyth? Like it looks to me almost like a commodity from a distance. Like as a DeFi user, I could tell you exactly why you use Aave or Camino or Maker. But when it comes to the benefits of, price feeds, oracles, like I've got to say, I'm like very happy with all the DeFi I use with Pyth, whether it's Chainlink or Redstone. So this has always been a black box to me as a builder. Like, how would you kind of walk us through that decision?
Yeah, so there's a couple of elements that make Pyth unique. So, and the way that you want to analyze your decision is going to be based on like, what are the attributes that you need to build your successful application? So there's the first one would be like, what sort of symbols do you need, right? And so if it's just crypto, then, that's going to narrow things down a little bit. But let's say that you wanted to have like crypto and equities. So that's number one. It's like, do you have the accessibility to the number of symbols or the types of symbols that you need? Number two is like the method with which you're updating. So Pyth created a poll model. And so the architecture for Pyth is, as I mentioned before, data is coming directly from sources. It's being published to something called PythNet, which is it's an SVM chain that's fully publicly auditable. And all of the prices that aggregate on PythNet, there's 600 symbols there today, can be distributed equally to 90 different blockchains. Very clean model, very easy to understand. And then whenever a price is delivered to that blockchain, there's a tiny little Pyth fee that gets paid and collected. So whenever you use something from Pyth, it has this fee that's built in. Right now, the fees are set to super low, given where we are in the kind of the technology adoption curve. And this is novel. Historically, other oracles like Chainlink, they'll push prices on chain. So like they would do so at set intervals. So it's either this like threshold for volatility or like, this egg timer goes off every 12 hours. And then the problem with that is you actually have different setups depending upon the blockchain, and you have different symbols. So if you go to like Avalanche, you'll have X symbols that update, Y times. If you go to Near, you'll have a totally different set. So Pyth is by far the largest with regards to how many blockchains it's available on, by having 90. And there's 500 applications. They've all integrated with Pyth across these different blockchains. But the other thing that Pyth does the best, I would say, is it empowers high speed or high throughput applications. And it does this because using the Solana speeds at 400 milliseconds, it's been the fastest. Lazer will be even faster, but that's been the bread and butter. It really is designed to be directly from the source. So you cut out all these areas for latency, because you have to imagine if your network, like the Chainlink network is built on nodes, they're fetching prices. And there's going to be latency that gets added between the time that they're fetching the price and the time they're able to then publish the price. And oftentimes, the place they're fetching it from is also fetching the price. So there's this whole line of kind of middlemen. Pyth is designed to cut all that out. So the speed and the latency with which the network is able to publish these prices is a really important element of it. And then the final component of it is security. So let's say that none of this works, right? There's a number of security or safety measures that are in place for the Pyth network. There's 120 publishers. They publish to different price feeds. And each price feed will have a different number of publishers based on like the interest or the activity. But let's say that there's like 20 of them. We also have a minimum threshold, like there needs to be about 10 publishers per symbol in order to create an aggregate. And then there's some other enhanced information, like you get a price as well as this confidence intervals. That makes it very robust, right? So it's very difficult to manipulate that. You have to go figure out who the 10 are that are in this symbol, or if there's 20 as a minimum, you'd have to get 11 to go collude, and you don't know of the 120 which ones there are. So it's just sort of impractical to go and like do a social attack from it. But even if it did, Pyth has something that was launched at the end of last year with Price Oracle's V3 called Oracle Integrity Staking. That means that every one of the 600 price feeds in the network is protected by the stake. And today there's about 350 million Pyth that are staked to the network. They protect every one of these symbols. So if the symbol were to have a bad price relative to one of the most liquid exchanges that you can read off chain with the benefit of hindsight, then it's susceptible to having those publishers who contributed to the bad price be slashed. That then goes to the DAO and could be used to compensate people who have implemented. So there's a lot of safety measures, there's a lot of speed, but then the thing that I think people are most excited about is the fact that there's such a comprehensive guide or such a comprehensive set of symbols that are available, and it grows all the time. At the beginning of the year, we had about 450 symbols. We have 600 today. By the end of this year, we have a very ambitious target where we hope to have about 3,000 symbols.
Mike, you mentioned a bunch of things there that I want to dive into a bit deeper. One of them being Lazer. We'll come back to that. We've mentioned it a few times now, but you mentioned that Pyth is supporting 90 different chains. Something that I was thinking about was, that this thing we walked through with launching on Solana was obviously a very meaningful, I think, event for Pyth. But also thinking of just kind of like the opportunity cost and this kind of curation element of like deciding, okay, where are you going to go? How many resources are you going to use to support wherever you're going? And this kind of like constant opportunity cost of, I don't know if it's like spreading yourself thin. I actually don't know. Like, I'm kind of curious, like how much more workload it is on the Pyth team to, go chase all these different opportunities in our space. And I'm also thinking of like kind of what we have coming right now with all these Altel 1s and even Altel 2s. It seems like you've got Barachain, Monad, Movement, Mega ETH, the Hype EVM. Like, what are you thinking of with all of this, and how much is Pyth going to be involved with all these players?
Yeah, so I mean, the mission of the network is to bring the price of everything and make it available everywhere, right? We want to eventually have the symbol that every financial instrument trades at all around the world, reported to the Pyth network, and we want to make that available to every blockchain, every application around the world. And we think that's going to create this transformational, unified global financial market. And, in order to do that, you need to be able to deploy on lots of chains, and that was built into our architecture. And so the superpower really is the architecture. Now, as I described, you kind of have this hub and spoke model where the hub is this blockchain called PythNet, and it's connected via a series of bridges where we can pass messages very efficiently, and we can set up receiver contracts. Now, because of this architecture, the number one thing we worry about is making sure that PythNet's running and that all of the prices are coming in, because the downstream is really just these bridges and like they're bridged contracts. So they're much more lightweight. In some cases, if it's a new programming language, like say Stacks, we'll have to go and do a more detailed integration. If it's EVM, it's pretty straightforward. And if it's like fully EVM, like compatible, like a layer 2, it's very easy. So the architect design gives us this, ability to continue to scale. Of course, there's some work that needs to be built, and certainly monitoring that has to happen on all these different chains. But it's not one where it keeps me up at night. That's not the thing that like I worry about the most. We want to be on all the big new chains. We have been really successful at carving out our niche. So when people think about DeFi 1.0, they always associate Chainlink, and Chainlink still holds the highest market share in terms of the total value locked. And the big reason for that is because they have such a close relationship with Aave and Compound, right? Aave and Compound use exclusively Chainlink as their oracle. In DeFi 2.0, generally people think mostly around Pyth, right? And so Pyth has the largest total transaction volume on a monthly basis. In December, it was 20 billion more than Chainlink. It's been the largest for a really long time, as well as number of chains. And I think that's something that's really important. So when people start analyzing the differences between oracles, they see, okay, this is what these guys specialize in. And I think they're able to make these decisions pretty easily. With regards to new chains, like we do have to prioritize. We're live on all the ones that you mentioned on their test net. So Monad, Barachain, Hyper, EVM, and many others as well that we think are going to have big building ecosystems. And it's our intention to get there early. Because when you look at like the breakdown of Pyth in terms of the usage on chains where there's like high throughput, like DeFi available, like fast chains, Pyth's market share is commanding. It's usually over 90% on the total volume traded, and usually above 50% on the total value secured. So Solana, Sui, Optos, those are good examples of where Pyth has like a commanding stranglehold of the mind share of developers that have built using Oracle.
Egg, a quite astonishing commodity, the cause of your desire. Egg, which fills the inner void. Egg.
Eggs are pretty epic, but you know what's more epic? Paying for them with crypto. Borrow, earn, and now pay with Moonwell.
Say hello to Puffer Unify. Puffer Finance is expanding beyond native liquid restaking with new products such as Unify-based rollup and Unify pre-confirmations AVS. Unify is not just another L2. Unify is a based rollup, one that will solve L2 issues, such as slow withdrawals versus instant withdrawals with Puffer Unify. Puffer Unify is fast, capable of sub-second transactions. Unify also has boosted Puffer points, which means if you bridge assets, you earn boosted Puffer points and rewards from dApps on Unify. Puffer's core products mean a bright future for Ethereum. Learn more at puffer.fi. So one of the products that we've alluded to is this Pyth Lazer, and there's a great tweet that maybe we'll throw it into the show notes, but just a great tweet sort of outlining like why Pyth Lazer is such a big deal. And just to simplify it, I'll say there's 1 millisecond price feed. So I'm wondering, Mike, can you talk us through like how does this bridge like a gap in DeFi, and does it bring us closer to high frequency trading on chain, or like what's the significance of it?
Yeah, I mean, 400 milliseconds was super fast for blockchains in 2020, but it's actually not that fast anymore. And so we needed to continue to leapfrog like what was possible and what we think will be sort of future proof. At the end of the day, our team is DeFi. We don't necessarily care which chain or which application wins that much. We just care that DeFi wins collectively against TradFi. And we need to do so by having the performance and fee characteristics look similar, if not better. And that's the genesis of this. So Lazer is a subset of publishers who are super high performant and able to really reduce the latency in order to publish not only at 1 millisecond, 1 millisecond to being the frequency, but also the latency. The latency comes in at sub 10 milliseconds end to end from sort of the source. And they do this by a various set of like co-locating and, very specific on the geolocations of their data, the data centers and their servers. But that puts us, I think, as close as you possibly can to like the centralized exchange or the centralized financial industry. And that's really exciting to me because I don't think that we have fully realized the speeds necessary to win as an industry. Pyth Lazer will no longer be the bottleneck, right? And so my number one job when I'm thinking about Pyth and I'm playing for the team of DeFi is to make sure that I'm not the bottleneck. And there's two areas where Pyth can be a bottleneck. The first one is on the number of symbols, and I already told you that we want to be 3,000 symbols by the end of this year. By the end of the following year, I'd like to be over 10,000 symbols, and the following year after that, over 100,000. We truly do want the price of everything, and we want to make it available everywhere. And it requires a tremendous amount of work to be able to modify the PythNet blockchain, but we're obviously going to do so in order to make this even faster. So PythNet, or Pyth Core as we describe it, will continue to have these same security parameters that have been built in, right? Like there's lots of diversity around the publishers. It's fully transparent. It's a blockchain. It's optimized for security and all those things. It's fully permissionless. It's available. It's got this economic model that's built in. That will continue to become much faster. But then Pyth Lazer is designed to already be the fastest. So we want to make sure we're starting from the ground up with the fastest possible, because there's going to be applications that are going to be built that are like Hyperliquid that are just going to potentially leapfrog all the incumbents. And we want to make sure that those are now possible. So, removing the latency lag and removing any of the symbol lag is the most important thing for us to constantly do.
Mike, another announcement that I think garnered a lot of hype when it came out was this partnership with Revolut. And maybe you can break down kind of what this means to me, because I saw that they would become a data publisher, but I don't even really know what that means. Like maybe you can kind of like dumb it down for us and just kind of the deeper meaning of this partnership.
It's a super exciting partnership for those of us that live in Europe, like myself, even though I'm an American. Revolut is a household brand now. They are some combination of a Robinhood and kind of a neobank, and as well as sort of a travel money. And they've been exceptionally good at just creating the best UX, and they're gathering a tremendous amount of market share as a result. We've been working with them for a long time on a variety of partnerships, and publishing data is like the hallmark thing that you do as an institution to be able to kind of get into blockchains. It's the thing that all the high-frequency trading firms do. They publish their data. And so, Pyth Network is effectively a marketplace where people like Revolut or Jump or Tower or Susquehanna, they'll publish whatever data that they have that is meaningful, that can contribute to the prices that Pyth creates, that then have, built, that then are able to be the building blocks for DeFi. And so Revolut is going to take all the customer data that executes, or the data that they have from proprietary trading, or the data that they have from transfers, stuff that's proprietary to them, because it becomes an important element to understand like how much of the data you actually own. If you were to just say plug in to like the NASDAQ, you don't own that data just because it's on your computer screen. So you generate data and proprietary data based on the amount of trading you're doing. So a larger retail broker trades very frequently. Every one of those trade prints ends up becoming a proprietary piece of data that they can contribute. Now they can disguise it so that it's not like something that is being reverse engineered in any way. This is obviously something that's been very important to like the trading firms. They don't want to be giving away alpha. And so like there's a lot of thought that goes into how they're like publishing this data. But this is what they've done. They've contributed, and they're now a contributor just like these other institutions. Nomura also joined the network earlier last year. And we've had a couple of like Swiss banks, like Amina Bank. So what we're seeing is initially this started out as just like high frequency traders and smaller exchanges. Now, the bigger banks and institutions are always watching to see what these high frequency traders are doing, because they know that they're the ones that move the fastest and they make a lot of money. And we've gradually just creeped up the level of regulation and sophistication in terms of the industry or of servicing clients. And so I think that having somebody like Revolut, who's got hundreds of millions of clients around the world, and they operate in so many different jurisdictions, having them get comfortable to be a part of this network and start to grow is not just a manifestation of where they are in their journey. It shows you how much people have become so comfortable with the idea of empowering DeFi, especially an institution like this, right? It's in their best interest to be on the forefront of this. And also it gives them the ability to represent to both their shareholders as well as their customers that they are doing something that's actually crypto native. And so to me, it's the most exciting thing, because every time we hit that threshold, we get a whole lot of inbound, right? We get a lot of inbound from other institutions that look and feel a lot like these ones.
Mike, we're coming to the end of the interview here, and one thing we haven't covered is AI. So AI agents have been an emerging sector in crypto, specifically on-chain with DeFi. How is Pyth thinking about that? Like, what opportunity does that create for Pyth?
It's very timely to ask. So yesterday, Coinbase announced Coinbase Agents integration to Pyth, and I think that's going to be the first in a long line of integrations on AI. As I mentioned, Google never won finance, right? It all went through Bloomberg. And when you think about like most of the large language models, they actually don't have access to the best data, especially the most real-time stuff. And what Pyth has created is an original source of proprietary data from directly from the owners that can be used in language models that doesn't have to go through like the licensing or the distribution requirements of these huge exchanges that have highly controlled distribution mechanisms. To me, I think it's a game changer because you can now use this data in many more applications than you'd be able to with like the traditional, let's call it economic cycle or supply chain side of being able to go and procure a lot of these different data sets. The first integration that we had was with OpenBB or Open Bloomberg, and they're a protocol that is really just trying to create Bloomberg from the ground up using AI, and they have been leaning heavily on the open source elements of Pyth data. So we think this is going to be a huge avenue for us to grow in 2025, in addition to some of the other things I talked about. So 2025, I think about as just getting faster, more symbols, and being able to find more use cases for it, whether or not that's applications that are building new things with even more symbols because now they feel comfortable being able to offer equities or gold or oil, or it's on AI agents or AI application or AI powered applications that are able to do things that we actually haven't thought of yet because we haven't seen that segment in traditional finance.
Yeah, I think for years I had wondered like, when is AI going to take over traditional finance? And per usual, like crypto's always on the bleeding edge of these trends. And so now I'm just assuming that, we should enjoy our time when humans are trading on chain, that like AI agents they're going to act on our behalf, but they're also just going to be like ultimately like working together. And I don't know, it's something I'm excited about, but also has me a little bit nervous. That said, it's a huge opportunity for you guys with Pyth, and I think for other builders that can support that increase in economic activity. But anyways, I think this is a good place for us to wrap up, guys. So I want to remind our listeners that they should learn more about Pyth by going to pyth.network. Follow Pyth Network on X or Twitter. Follow Mike's personal handle, which is MDOM Cahill. We'll put that all into the show notes so you can easily reference it. And then, Mike, thanks so much for coming on the show. You really tell a comprehensive story around this. And to be fair, I think Nomadic and I, as we were prepping for this, we were just saying like a lot of what goes into oracles, a lot of the work that you guys do feels like a black box. So I feel like you're really able to like make it more real for us as users, just to appreciate like all these things we can do on chain, like why can we do them? And ultimately, how does Pyth feed into that? But anything else you'd like to share before we go? And we'd love to have you back on the show in the future.
No, this was a blast. Thanks so much. And it's cool to be able to articulate all these things. We understand a lot of those views of how things could feel like a black box. And, we love the opportunity to kind of demystify them and show how it all works. So it was really a blast and a great opportunity.
Thanks everyone for tuning in. If you're a talented founder or developer, please consider reaching out to our team at fourthrevolution.capital. And to stay up to date with future episodes, plus get expert tips, strategies, and exclusive content, subscribe to our free newsletter at the-edge.xyz.